Why are NBN's instant quotes so insanely expensive?
And can updates to the COVIDsafe app lead to Australians actually trusting it?
Vertical Hold is proudly brought to you by Aussie Broadband, changing the game with their award-winning network and Australian-based support.
Hi there. Welcome to Vertical Hold Behind the Tech News, the weekly podcast where we sneak across the state borders to catch up with Australia's leading technology journalists and get the stories behind the tech news of the week. If you're tuning in for the first time, I'm Alex Kidman, and I'm joined every week by my co-host, Mr. Adam Turner, a man with pure broadband running through his veins. Adam, what kind of download speeds can I expect through the National Adam Network, or NAN?
Well, it's not just a numbers game here at NAN Broadband, but it'll certainly be fast enough to pay your telecom bill online and stream ABC FM, maybe a couple of old episodes of The Bill. At NAN's Broadband, we believe 250 megabits per second is more than enough for anyone.
I'll line up the serial cables and that Doom multiplayer session now. This week, we're also once again joined by ZDNet Australia editor Chris Duckett, a man who may or may not have mainlined a bit of broadband in his time. Chris, welcome back to the show.
Yeah, look, the old JavaScript developer in me is having flashbacks over NAN broadband. It better not be about the numbers because it's not a number.
Well, speaking of broadband, here at Vertical Hold, we've reported a number of times that the NBN as our soup du jour was done, and then something else seems to happen and it's back on the menu again. This week, it's instant NBN fibre upgrade quotes going live with some eye-watering prices, and we'll be crunching the numbers and the practical reality with Chris shortly. And also, listeners, make sure you hang around until the end of the show because we're still running our listener survey, your chance to have your say about what you like and what you don't like about Vertical Hold. And to sweeten the deal, you can win fabulous prizes courtesy of Belkin, so stick around to the end of the show to find out how. Before we talk NBN with Chris, we first caught up with Asha Barbaschow from ZDNet because the government's making some big changes to the COVIDsafe app, designed to make it more reliable and useful for Australians. Hi Asha, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Now, this week we saw some news around COVIDsafe, which for a lot of Australians was that app the government said we had to have a few months ago. What's new in the COVIDsafe world?
Yeah, the digital sunscreen. I guess it was touted as initially.
I feel safer already.
What's new? I guess this time it's touting the changes will significantly improve its capability. They've migrated the app to Herald, and now the tech community has highlighted that it's incorrect to actually call it a protocol, and rather that it's a collection of workarounds for something that the operating system doesn't actually want you to do. So the new upgrades will incorporate the new Herald Bluetooth that Minister for Government Services is explaining would offer unparalleled app-level Bluetooth performance.
So it's a hack.
I mean, it's a series of workarounds.
So it's a series of hacks.
It still uses the original Blue Trace protocol, and I guess they've added other things to make it perhaps a little bit more useful.
Do we know where this hack/protocol came from? Is it like from our friends at the NSA or a little bit less suspicious than that?
Well, VMware has a great explainer on it on their website of what it actually is. You do kind of have to have a bit of knowledge already. So I did try to explain it to my parents. Didn't really go too well. They started making me question my own understanding of it. But I guess what the big push from the government is that this time around they're reporting that even locked iPhone to lock iPhone logs are recording excellent performance, which is where they were proving to be practically useless. Logging encounters previously. So now they're touting this as 80 to 100% excellent. It sits around the 96% they're saying. So yeah, I guess they're saying that it works a bit better this time.
So, I mean, as you say, Herald's this VMware developed not quite protocol, not quite hack. I believe the UK actually looked at using Herald earlier in the year when it was working out how it was going to do its whole track and trace thing, but they dropped out of that and went with where almost everyone else is, which is with the whole Google Apple API solution. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, the DTA CEO, Randall Brageau, he said that while the DTA has been engaged with Apple and Google on working through what he called conflicts between their respective devices, um, but he said that the current Apple and Google exposure notification framework has much poorer backward compatibility, which has kind of been turned on its head a little bit with the Australian tech community again. I'll cite them. But he said that there's no kind of desire to restart it and go with that one, rather than continuing on with what they've already spent a lot of money and time on.
Why won't they go with the Apple? Like, why did they originally not go with the Google Apple one? They might say now, oh, we're too far down the track, but people told them in the first place that what they're trying to do wasn't going to work, and the best way to get it to work was actually to use Apple and Google's solution.
My understanding was that it wasn't exactly ready in this local market. Now I could be wrong on that, and I would need to go back and have a look because we're talking early April when, I mean, this is when COVID-19 was just starting to work its way into conversation. So the Australian government did jump on this pretty quickly, but it kind of could come down to should they've waited a little bit longer to build something that was actually going to be useful and adopted at scale rather than push forward with the COVIDsafe app that we have now.
The other aspect there, though, is one of control. And they've made some public statements around this that the Apple Google framework will tell you if you're running an app
Yep.
that uses it, it'll tell you, hey, you've been in contact with someone else who's running the app. There may be an exposure thing, but it won't tell the government. It doesn't give them that level of data. And their argument is that that's quite useful in contract tracing and making sure people are doing the right thing. Of course, there are some privacy and, of course, usability and workability issues with that too.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that was actually one thing that I did forget to mention, that the current COVIDsafe app that we're using, it does give local and so that state authorities with access to the data. Now the government has said since day one, and there's even legislation that says that the federal government doesn't actually have any access to that data, but local authorities do. So I guess the fact that having that sovereign capability was the main selling point for the government, that the thing that they were focusing on the most. And of course, adopting things that are built by those device makers kind of goes against that sovereign idea that they had from day one.
Do you think it's too late now to get people to take up the COVIDsafe app? I mean, in the eyes of a lot of people, we're past the worst of the pandemic. That may or may not be true, but I think that's maybe how the general public might be starting to look at it. If I've got away without having the app until now, do I really need it now? How do they sell it? And how do they, especially do they sell it by saying, oh, it was great before, but it's even greater now?
Like, if you look at the statistics, it said that there were only 17 cases picked up using COVIDsafe that were found without the use of manual contact tracing. And of course, Labor is looking at that as a number figure. So if you use their maths, their estimation of around 70 million on the COVIDsafe app, most of it on marketing, they've made that work out to be about 4 million per unique contact. Some would argue that that's a little bit pricey to find one person that could have maybe found out by manual tracing as well. But I guess on the issue of eroding public trust, if it hasn't already, they've burned a lot of money on this. And in New South Wales, most Sydney facilities are using the Service New South Wales QR code check-in system. I've been to a few restaurants, pubs, cafes myself, checked in, no problem. There seems to be general understanding that that's the right thing to do, and no one is really refusing to do that. Obviously, that's a whole other privacy can of worms. And in Melbourne, they're progressing to the QR code system as well. I think that a lot of people have confidence in that kind of system where the facility or the pub, for example, that you're at, that they will reach out and contact you if they know that there's been an outbreak or a potential outbreak. There seems to be trust in that system, but yet not so much trust in the actual COVIDsafe app itself. And I couldn't tell you why, but that seems to be where the majority of people are preferring to put all their trust in.
I think it's a question of ease of use, though. QR code, camera, blap, I'm done. as opposed to, here's this app, I have to run it, it might kill my battery, it might not work anyway, I seem to be paying a lot of money for it. But the QR code's kind of the other side of the equation here too, because we've got all these disparate systems. You mentioned Service New South Wales, Victoria's got one. I think the ACT and the Northern Territory is sharing one. South Australia's got one. And those are just the state ones. Individual businesses can have their own. There's no real oversight on all of this stuff. It's a lot. Relative to the regulation around COVIDsafe, it's a lot messier, isn't it?
It is. And then there's also the issue of what happens to that data that you've given the little cafe around the corner. Yes, they might not necessarily be the biggest target for a cyber attack, but they could still potentially have that information that is gold. Your phone number, your email address, your mobile number, your home number, address, absolutely everything that they could request that they gather before you enter the premises. That's a whole trove of data that there isn't necessarily full disclosure on what happens to that afterwards. At least the COVIDsafe app is marketed as storing the contacts with the phone on the phone, for 21 days, which allows for the 14-day incubation period. But automatically deleting contacts older than 21 days is written into legislation. So that's, if I had to somehow give some praise to the app, that's what I would go with versus the QR system.
I've heard people argue that the smart thing to do would be to build the QR system into the COVIDsafe app. And so then a whole lot of people who haven't bothered to download the COVIDsafe app for contact tracing will go, oh, but I need the COVIDsafe app for this QR thing. And that's great for checking into cafes and whatever. And hey, what do you know? You now have the COVIDsafe tracing app. Do you think contact tracing app? Do you think that would have been a smart approach and maybe too smart an idea for them to actually think of themselves?
Well, I'm going to answer that one by quoting the DTA's Barbaschow again. He said, in order to implement a QR code in COVIDsafe, it's technically simple and we could very easily add it. But once we look at the legislation that controls the use of data that's captured from COVIDsafe, QR would naturally provide location-based information. And that's something that they've been saying from the beginning, that we don't have your location. We don't know where you've been. We just know that someone that is infected or potentially infected has come into contact with you. And I guess when you do check into a facility, your exact location is known. But I'm not overly sure that that's an issue for people. So perhaps they should have looked at how they could implement QR system with that as well.
But also you could silo that functionality within the app. You wouldn't have to have all of this data stored in the one place. You could keep having the COVIDsafe contact tracing data managed the way it was, and then the QR code data, sending it off to a totally different data repository in the same way as other QR codes. There's no reason why it would have to mix unless you were just looking for an excuse not to do it.
Adam, you'd need fresh legislation for that. I think the point that they're making is that what they're allowed to do with COVIDsafe is quite narrowly defined. That's was generally
not technically,
seen as good.
But legally, yeah, all right.
But legally, I think it's the legal aspects that hit it. I think the other issue, though, and I'll get back to this again, is it comes down to that ease of use thing. QR is so hard baked into most mobile devices that pretty much all you've got to do is open your camera app and point at a QR code. Whereas saying, oh, it's in COVIDsafe, oh, I don't have the app on my phone, or I don't have enough data, or the reception's lousy, I won't bother. And then businesses won't like it because they've then perhaps lost a sale because you've gone, oh, it's too hard to stop in this pub or whatever. I don't want to read a licensing agreement before I get my beer. And people aren't necessarily going to use it, which I think is a problem. I think we really do need to stress that even though Australia's been incredibly lucky in global terms around the whole COVID spread, we're nowhere, we're not out of this thing in any way. And complacency, I think, is pretty dangerous.
I mean, in theory, the idea of me not doing a single thing except walking past someone at a shopping centre or potentially lingering past them too long while I'm shopping, and then being alerted that person has potentially infected me, in theory, that's a great idea. But that's not how it ended up being. There was issues when the app was not launched, where if the issues with the iPhones being locked, etc., everything that we've obviously heard since April. But in theory, the idea behind it was ease of use. It just hasn't been easy to use.
Now, Asha, this is not yet live, is it? We're still actually waiting, I think, for the government to release the source code so people can look at it and make sure they're happy with that. Then it goes through to Apple and Google, unless I'm very much mistaken. Like this new version,
Yeah.
the Herald-based version.
The Herald branch code, it's not ready for inspection. So the government is labeling this as working with the tech community, and they're focusing on how they're, I guess, collaborating and listening to what the tech community is saying. But it's not necessarily the case from what I'm reading from Australia's tech community. So the code isn't ready for inspection. There's no documentation or supporting information provided as yet on how to assess the changes, or even in particular why configuration values were chosen. But what they are saying, what seems to be very clear, is that the kind of overarching belief is that Herald migration should be suspended, and they tend to recommend that COVIDsafe move to the Apple Google exposure notification framework, even saying as soon as possible. So the tech community is kind of backing what you both were saying earlier, that perhaps we should have gone further down the path of visiting what we could do, working with Apple and Google to make a more sovereign functionality.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for your time, Asha.
Well, thanks very much for having me.
Now, this is your time, as we always do with our guests on this show, for you to spruik where people can enjoy your writing, where they can find you on social media, and, as is our style of the moment, your chance to vote for the best biscuit of 2020.
Okay, well, you can find my articles on ZDNet.com, and my Twitter handle, I think it has 5 E's in it. So that's Asha B and then 5 E's. I think 3 and 4 E's were both taken, so I had to opt for the 5. But this was back in 2009, so I can't be held accountable for any of that. And the best biscuit, well, it has to be Oreos, because, and this is, I can't believe I've got
a
this
non-patriotic choice. Wow.
Well, I can't believe I've got this far without mentioning the fact that I'm vegan. So Oreos are the vegan cookie, or biscuit, sorry.
They're American. Do they even count as food, legally speaking?
Look, probably not. Probably not.
So, Chris, NBN has made some changes to the way it gives you quotes on what you have to cough up if you want fibre to run all the way to your front door. What's the story?
So I think there's nothing really more here than people learning how the NBN sausage is made and being completely disturbed by what they saw. For the simple explanation is NBN more or less just put the desktop analysis, I'm doing air quotes so you can't see it, but the desktop analysis they used to do when you first asked them to upgrade your connection, they would do one of these desktop analyses and come up with this ridiculous number. And so what it does is it just takes your address and then goes and looks through the back end, obviously, and says, well, how far back do I have to go to find the fiber? How much would it cost to lead in? There's probably some dollar per kilometer or something in there. And then it spits out these numbers. So people online were getting all up in arms because it was 14,000, 30,000, 24,000 to connect their home up with broadband. There was one interesting person who did their whole street and then found this wide range of numbers. I think that's very interesting. But I mean, these are the sort of numbers we've seen around previously. People actually paying 40K to upgrade from like fixed wireless to full fiber. So this is kind of in the ballpark for what it should have been. This is the sort of envelope it usually costs. The interesting bit, and the reason why this tool has appeared, is after NBN starts doing its local loops, it will then say, okay, your street's upgraded. You can go online and then you'll find out, how much it would be. But then that program is going to be paid by the ISPs anyway. So yeah, this is just there basically to scare the children, I think.
But they used to scare the children and charge them for it, didn't? I mean, isn't the difference this week that they've said, I think it was like $300 just to apply?
Yeah.
and now they've basically said, yeah, look, here's a button you can click to be scared.
Yeah, which makes me want to be more scared of the previous process where they charge $300 to basically get someone to push the button. I want to go back in time and get that job because that pays really well. Yeah, they basically pulled the veil back, opened up one of their tools, and we all knew that there were monsters in there, and we found the monsters.
How does this fit with what they announced recently about they will run more fiber to people? So it's possible you might get this upgrade for free without having to pay for it. Why would you do this now?
Yeah, there's a lot of questions with that. For instance, I put in an address that I knew had HFC, and the tool was like, "Oh no, you're on HFC. We're not even going to, basically put up roadblocks." But on what NBN recently announced, that's the one where if you upgrade to a higher speed tier that your current connection isn't capable of, that's when the NBN will upgrade you for free. So
Surely
if
that
you're
would be cheaper than handing over 20, 30, 40 grand.
Yeah, absolutely. Like the takeaway from this is if you're on fiber to the node, hang tight. You're going to get an upgrade in the next 5 years. I mean, this is a long timeline, but that's
Well,
how
you can't
infrastructure
see me
works.
shaking my head like air quotes, head shake.
You know what though? Here's the thing that makes people angry. If we were still doing the original Labor policy, there would still be a large number of people still waiting. And I'm not talking about the cost argument because you can't get into that. But the point is the original plan still wasn't going to be complete around about this time either. So it's been a decade already, and there are a collection of poor buggers that have to hold tight all the time.
So, Chris, I wanted to pick you up on your, hold tight 5 years, you will get an upgrade. Isn't it something like 75% of that? And I'm remembering here, and I may have my numbers slightly out. Isn't it something like 75% of the fiber to the node footprint is going to get that fiber local loop stuff? Isn't there still a kind of 25% chance that you might be the unluckiest of the unlucky?
And by that, do you mean like being on the fiber to the basement connection I'm on, where there is no upgrade path? Yes.
I'm speaking from an HFC connection. There's no upgrade path there. Although
you are
also
getting
mentioned
a new DOCSIS though.
Yeah, maybe eventually.
Hold tight, mate. Hold tight.
There's a lot of holding tight going on here.
There is a lot of butt clenching around the NBN. Haven't you cottoned onto that by now?
They do seem to have, though, an upgrade path for HFC at least. I've seen people, and my own brother who's been on this show a number of times, put in for an HFC quote because I told him, I tried and I couldn't get one. And Adam, I think you couldn't get one.
Yeah, I'm on HFC. I just said, couldn't get a number.
We can't generate a quote for you at this time is the language or something like that. But he's on HFC, tried to get a quote, and I think they quoted him 14 grand. He's not he's in an urban built-up area. He's not that very far from a station. I can't imagine they'd have to run that much fibre. But they will, it seems, do it if you've got the money. But in some cases, I mean, it's extraordinary sums of money. Are they actually overcharging?
I haven't built out a line of my own in the recent couple of years. I mean, look, most of it comes down to the fact that to put a full fibre connection in, and we've known this for years in the stuff that's come out from estimates, but most of the money is in the labour cost of digging into the ground to get that cable laid, right? It's not, rolling out your own spool of fibre. And that's part of the reason why they came up with the whole fibre to the curb stuff, because they reckon most of the cost was in digging up people's gardens. So, look, are they overcharging? Yes. What do I have evidence of this? Not much, but it's the NBN, so I'm probably on pretty good ground. But yeah, look, these are extraordinary amounts of money. And the thing is, though, with Angus, it might actually work the other way. So if you're in a HFC suburb and say you're in the middle of it, they would then need to run a fibre further than they were if you were on the side of it near a boundary near some, say, fibre to the node. So there's many variables in this for why one quote isn't like another quote, and why NBN just doesn't come out and say, hey, everybody, if you all pay $5,000, we can upgrade you all to full fibre.
Do we have many stats on how many people have actually taken up this program over the years?
Oh, look, I can't remember the number off the top of my head, but it is, look, it's in the maybe 200, 300, 400, maybe. They had another, so Tech Choice is the program for individuals. Then they had one called, what was it, Area Choice or Tech Area or something, where basically local councils could go to them and say, hey, we want our Shire upgraded. And to my knowledge, I can't think of one off the top of my head that actually made it through. Most of them got the quote. And so take the sort of 15, 20 grand you're seeing per premise and just times that by the number of premises in a Shire.
Yeah, a lot of butt clenching.
Yeah, a lot of butt clenching. And as we know, local councils aren't quite the money bags that people think they are. So they saw these numbers and they're just like, no way at all. Like, where's our bulk discount, Oh, sure, we'll slash 30% off. Well, still way too high. So to my knowledge, a lot of those councils then got very angry because obviously they paid that original fee to get the desktop analysis back.
Per household, multiply it out. Yeah.
Hey, everyone, your rates are going up.
Yeah, basically, yeah.
Your broadband's not, but your rates are.
So the other way that you could cut this down, in theory, is with a group switch. So you get everyone in your neighbourhood to say, yeah, we all want fibre. We'll all kind of chip in. But even there, I noticed it was interesting when I was putting in my quote in. NBN Co says that group switch may reduce the cost for your installation, not that it will.
Yeah.
Does that mean that they're actually intent, like, because you said someone had done their whole street. If that whole street said, yes, we want it, NBN Co would then say, right, 19 grand for you, 19 grand for you, 19 grand for you. Isn't that nonsense?
Yes. But
what's
but
your
also
point?
Yeah, but also, I mean, the fact of life is that you might have an easy install and the person next door, particularly in the part of the world where you are, Alex, might have massive basalt deposits under it. And so, digging a hole is a...
Have you been spying on me? Because actually that's a frighteningly accurate assessment of the problems they'd have locally. But
yeah, but knowing Northern Sydney the way I do, it's like one side probably has some nice soil and the next of it is perched on a rock. And it's like, maybe 19 grand won't cover the heavy machinery we need to do this. So that's why they've got those caveats in there. I don't know if you remember a couple of months ago, there was this great story of a guy in Queensland who was really, really annoyed that he paid the full price for this and then his neighbours got in on it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that guy was called Matt. Every street needs a Matt. I would like to see Matt.
A schmuck called Matt.
Yep. A schmuck to the street plan could work. If you can find the one person in your street that's willing and online enough to want to have this, then you could leech off them.
So the equivalent of that person, I think it was in Queensland at a Toy World, who paid off everyone's lay-bys by paying for everyone's connections. But even then, would it still be cheaper?
Would it be cheaper to leech off a Matt? Yes, it would be cheaper. You would think. There's no reason to think why it wouldn't be cheaper. I mean,
once the fibre was already in the street.
Yeah, if you knew there was fibre in your street and they threw up 14K at you, I think you would have a very nice soapbox to stand on to point and yell at them, I think, at the very least.
Everybody might not know that. That's the thing. They kind of rely on not knowing things. I remember when I had arguments with Telstra for years because I had Telstra cable in my street, but they wouldn't hook me up because the way the street plans were originally done, my house wasn't there. And then someone at Telstra heard about this and, oh, what do you know? Magically, we can fix it. So I thought, and they told me what you had to do to the magic handshake to get it done. So I thought, right, we'll put this to the test. So I walked up the street to my friend's house who's had the same problem where they couldn't get connected. They rang Telstra, said, can you talk to my friend? Put me on the phone. I spoke to them and said, they said, no, we can't hook you up. I said, but the cable's in the street. They said, no, it's not in the street. I said, I know it's in the street. They said, it must be someone else's cable. At which point I totally lost my shit and said, how stupid do you think I am? So, yeah, they can make up whatever they want because they can rely on the fact that your average person doesn't know.
Yep. And this is the sort of thing they hide behind the whole commercial in confidence, right?
Yep.
Like we've got a government-owned business which is going to be government-owned for quite some time. But there's as much transparency as a post-privatized Telstra. It's like, technically we all own this, and you'd think it would be reasonable for them to actually publish a map of where they've deployed what technology, but they won't, because one day they might get sold, and they don't want to basically cut their own valuation inflation if somebody actually knew what was where.
But also that would make it easier for their competition to cherry pick the gaps.
Yes, exactly, which is their other point. But, once again, you're talking about, this is the problem with government-owned businesses behaving like commercial entities, right? If it was a proper government-owned business, then it could rely on the government coffers to actually get out in front of that. But it won't, because it has to make a profit, and one day it's going to be sold off.
Well, speaking of making up numbers, the other bit of NBN news this week, which I know you've written about, Chris, they have some new numbers about how good they are, don't they?
Well, this was out of the Department for Communications, which is now part of a mega department called Department of Transport Infrastructure. There are two other words, and then communications. But the by and large is they've caught the same disease NBN's caught, which is they decide that looking at speed test results from around the world, that they don't like this reality and they want to create one of their own. So the first thing they do is they toss out Singapore, because obviously city-state, you could roll out fibre there in a couple of years, which Singapore has done with their own NBN. So they toss that out. And then you get rid of South Korea for reasons I'm not entirely sure about, because of some of the countries they've added into the mix, like Qatar. And once you get rid of these problematic nations, you have a select group of around 20 that you approve of. You then state that you can't compare Australia to the UK before then adding the UK into the comparison. And before you know it, Australia is in the top 10 and we're great.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
We're number one. We're
the Olympics should work that way.
Supply.
And to be fair to them, they didn't massage it completely. They did leave us at 7. Yeah. So, yeah, it's just this, like, that there is an argument, and it's a good argument, comparing to places like Singapore, Hong Kong, like, okay, that's not really apples to apples. Comparing Australia to Canada, very apples to apples. Comparing us to the US, they've got a lot more density, but, they've still got the same problems with regional infrastructure that we have. But just wanting to prove that somehow your policy makes your country a top 10 country because you don't like the speed test numbers is just ridiculous. Like, they actually had a good argument there a couple of years ago when they said most of these speed test numbers are a result of basically all the old ADSL connections still being tested. And as we roll out the NBN, those numbers will go up, which they've done. But the problem is that the rest of the world is going up. And instead of focusing on the fact that, hey, we've basically moved from a network that had a baseline of somewhere between 8 to 12 megabits per second, we've got everyone in the country, theoretically, on 25 megabits per second, because, satellite has a lot of issues. But basically, there's a 25 megabit per second baseline there. And rather than telling that story, they're obsessed with the fact that, oh my goodness, we're in the low 30s. And then you just get on this ridiculous run of countries that shouldn't have broadband. Like, I don't know why Kazakhstan isn't allowed to have good broadband, but every time these surveys come out, apparently people lose their heads because we're trailing the Kazakhs. And it's like,
they're not Borat fans?
Well, it's like, but the Kazakhs, they launched the Russian rockets into space off their territory. They've got a better space program than us. That's something you can get in a twist about. But broadband? Really? It's just like, we've got worse broadband than insert country that I'm side-eyeing at the moment in a very veiled, kind of way. And it's just a bad conversation all the way around. Like, there actually is a good story, which is things in broadband terms, they're not perfect, but they're a lot better than they were 10 years ago.
That's coming from a very low base.
Look, when you're exiting hell, you know,
the glass of ice water is
when
appreciated.
you go from the 5th circle of hell into the 4th,
That's reason to celebrate.
you're like, hey, these temperatures, this is a cool change, right? Like, we're not in a good spot, but it's nothing like back where we were.
Well, that about wraps up another episode of Vertical Hold. Thanks to Chris for taking time out of his day to join us for the show.
No worries, gents. Always a pleasure to be here.
Now, Chris, this is your moment to tell the world about where they can find your work, yourself on social media, and, of course, most critically, your choice for the best biscuit of 2020.
So you can find me online. Honestly, just type my name into Google. You will find me. There aren't that many of me. In terms of best biscuit, I can never go past the Meist Volvos from the Caliph Tonight in 2003. I've been living on that joke for 20 years, and I will continue to do so. Go find Meist Volvos McAuliffe on YouTube. It is well worth 5 minutes of your time.
I should also throw out a big thanks to Asha for joining us. And as always, you can catch up with us online at Vertical Hold AU on Twitter, at verticalhold.com.au on the web, or via the Vertical Hold Facebook page.
And before you go, listeners, just a reminder that we're running a survey with some great prizes to help make Vertical Hold bigger and better in 2021. The survey is running till the end of the year, with one lucky listener each week winning a fabulous Belkin Accessories prize pack with your choice of Apple or Android compatible gear. We'll ship it anywhere in Australia thanks to our great friends at Belkin, and we've just sent a second one out in the post today. It doesn't matter if you haven't been listening for long or if you don't listen every week, we'd still love to hear from you. To complete the listener survey, just head to verticalhold.com.au/survey. That website again, verticalhold.com.au/survey. Vertical Hold is proudly brought to you by Aussie Broadband, changing the game with their award-winning network and Australian-based support.
The only noise you also might hear is my kitten.
That's
So if he
okay.
does-
Kittens are good.
We
We
can
are
totally-
pro-kitten
Yeah,
on
we're
this show.
pro-kitten.